The winter of 1943 settled over Eastern Europe like a gravicloth, cold and heavy, seeping into the bones of soldiers and civilians alike. Entire towns lay flattened into gray scars where homes once stood. Forests were carved by artillery fire, and fields that used to harvest wheat now harvested iron, smoke, and ash. Against this bleak canvas stood the 12th Infantry Division, a once proud formation now reduced to weary survivors who carried more ghosts than ammunition. Among them was Corporal Marcus Keller, a quiet, methodical soldier whose endurance had come not from patriotism or ideology, but from the grim understanding that survival was its own kind of duty in a world where life had become uncertain and death routine. Marcus was not remarkable in appearance, medium height, a narrow face weathered by cold and sleepless nights, and eyes that had shifted from youthful brightness to a muted gray that mirrored the sky above the front lines. What set him apart was not bravery, for bravery had long lost meaning in a landscape where courage and fear walked side by side, but a capacity for observation. He noted everything: the direction of smoke in the wind, the weight of artillery echoes, the tremor in a soldier's hand just before shell shock overtook him. In another life, in another world, Marcus might have become an engineer, perhaps even a teacher. But in 1943, roles were rewritten by war, and his destiny became tied to the scattered remnants of a division struggling to hold its ground. The 12th Infantry Division had been ordered to establish a temporary command post in an abandoned village near the Dnieper River. Snow lay untouched on crumbling rooftops, and frozen laundry still hung on rusted lines, stiff like the limbs of mannequins. The villagers had fled months earlier, driven away by the constant shifting of front lines. Now the only traces of life were the faint footprints of patrols and the crows perched on chimneys, waiting for the next round of artillery fire to unearth their feast. The soldiers entered the village with caution, moving quietly through the streets, as if disturbing the silence would call forth something malevolent. Marcus's squad was assigned to sweep through the southern edge of the village, securing a cluster of houses that once belonged to farmers. Most had been looted long before, but what concerned them were the signs of recent occupation: extinguished campfires, scraps of cloth, and the faint smell of tobacco that did not belong to any of their units. Partisans had moved through, or perhaps deserters, or perhaps families too afraid to flee too far. In war, danger wore many faces, and none could be dismissed lightly. Their commanding officer, Lieutenant Weber, was a strict but fair man, his leadership shaped by the loss of half his company in the previous year. He trusted Marcus more than most, often relying on his quiet assessments. On that first morning in the village, Weber approached him as the sky shifted from black to white, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the freezing air. "Take your men through the barns," he instructed, voice low but steady. "Be thorough. We can't afford surprises." Marcus nodded, signaling to his squad 8 men, each carrying the exhaustion and unease that months of conflict carved into a man's posture. They moved through the barns with rifles raised, checking piles of hay, overturned barrels, and the shadows where the dim light failed to reach. The structures groaned with the wind, boards shifting like old bones. Nothing moved inside, only the echo of their steps and the faint rustling of mice under the floorboards. When they emerged back into the daylight, Marcus noticed something odd. Footprints near the well, small and erratic, almost like those of a child. He crouched to examine them. The snow around the prints had partially melted, 10 refrozen, suggesting they were made within the last day. His brow furrowed. No civilians were supposed to be within miles of this sector. Yet the pattern of the prints, the way they veered toward the smaller cottage at the village edge, stirred something uneasy within him. He followed the prints alone for a few meters before stepping back. The lieutenant needed to know, but so did the men. Information kept soldiers alive. "There's someone else here," Marcus told the squad quietly. "Smaller steps, not one of ours." Weapons tightened in uncertain hands. The possibility of hidden civilians was unsettling. The possibility of scouts or saboteurs even more so. The squad advanced carefully, checking corners and windows as they approached the cottage. The door hung open slightly, pushed inward by the wind. Marcus, motioned for 2 men to flank the building, while he approached the entrance with slow, deliberate steps. Inside, the air was colder than outside, and the faint smell of burnt wood lingered in the corners. The cottage was nearly empty. A few broken dishes, a torn blanket, and a wooden chair on its side. But something else caught his attention. A small wooden toy placed neatly on the windowsill. A carved horse, roughly made, smoothed by years of handling. It did not belong in an abandoned cottage ravaged by war. Before he could investigate further, one of the soldiers called out from the back room. "Sir, you need to see this." Marcus rushed toward the voice. In the corner of a tiny bedroom, behind a chest of drawers, he found a makeshift hiding place covered by a worn blanket. And beneath that blanket lay a young boy, thin, trembling, cheeks hollow from hunger, eyes wide with the terror of a child who had seen more than a child ever should. The boy clutched a piece of bread so hard it crumbled in his hands. The soldiers froze. Some lowered their weapons, uncertain, while others looked to Marcus for guidance. The boy did not speak. His lips parted as if to form words, but only shallow breaths escaped. Marcus knelt, meeting the boy's frightened gaze, resisting the urge to reach out too quickly. "It's all right," he whispered in a calm, steady voice. "You're safe." Now, but safety was a difficult promise. War devoured innocence without hesitation, and this boy's presence signaled complications the division could not afford. Lieutenant Weber arrived moments later, his expression shifting from suspicion to concern. They questioned the boy gently, though he answered little. He was Ukrainian, around 9 years old, and had been hiding alone since his mother disappeared weeks earlier. Marcus felt a heavy tightness in his chest as he listened. The war had spared no family, no matter how small or vulnerable. The lieutenant ordered the boy to be taken to the field medic, and Marcus lifted him carefully, the child's body light as a bundle of sticks. As they walked back through the snow, Marcus sensed eyes, watching from the forest beyond the village. Perhaps partisans tracking the soldiers, perhaps wild animals drawn by the smell of conflict, or perhaps just the eerie stillness of a world that had grown accustomed to violence. Whatever it was, the sensation lingered like a weight on his shoulders. Back at the makeshift command post, the boy received warm blankets and a ration of soup. While the medic attended to him, Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, studying the child with a mixture of protective instinct and dread. Children were fragile threads in the fabric of war, easily torn and impossible to mend fully. Marcus knew the division would eventually move on, leaving behind only footprints and whispers. What would become of the boy then? He did not allow himself to dwell too long. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. Fires flickered weakly against the cold, and the men huddled close to conserve heat. Marcus lay in his tent, unable to sleep. His thoughts drifted between the boy's frightened eyes and the harsh reality awaiting them at dawn. Orders would arrive soon, and the division would advance deeper into contested territory. For Marcus, the boy had become a symbol, a reminder that beneath the brutality of the front lines, humanity still flickered, fragile but persistent. Outside, the winter wind howled across the ruined village, carrying with it the distant rumble of artillery fire. The front was shifting again, inching closer with every heartbeat. Marcus closed his eyes, uncertain of what the next day would bring, but aware that this encounter, this boy, had changed something within him. War had stripped him of many things, but not yet his capacity to care. And in the chaos of 1943, that was perhaps the rarest resource of all. The days following the regiment's deployment brought a shift not only in the geography around them, but in the emotional landscape of every man who marched beneath the battered flag of the 12th Infantry Division. As the column pushed farther east, they encountered villages reduced to skeletal silhouettes, burnt beams protruding from earth like the ribs of starved animals. Windows blackened, roofs collapsed inward from mortar fire that had fallen weeks before their arrival. The war they had previously imagined as a distant political matter now revealed itself in crushed stones, abandoned cradles, empty wells, and the unbearable silence of homes that no longer kept warm the families that once lived inside. These sights marked the beginning of their true initiation into the conflict. Some men tried to soften its weight with wry humor, others with silence, and still others with a hardened focus on orders. Yet the impact settled on all of them with equal gravity. No training ground could have prepared them for this slow crawl through a land stripped of its humanity. The regiment reached the devastated manufacturing town of Hohenfeld on a mist-soaked morning. The area had once supported hundreds of families working in factories that now stood gutted. Their chimneys split open, their machinery twisted. According to military dispatches, civilians had fled weeks earlier during a rapid advance by the opposing forces. Yet, the traces of panic remained scattered everywhere close. Abandoned on fences half-eaten, meals still unbroken. Tables, medical kits opened and dropped as if someone had tried and failed to save a life in those final hours. Captain Reinhardt spent the morning walking through the ruins with his map in hand, making notes about possible defensive positions and supply routes. From the perspective of official records, it would later appear as though Hohenfeld was simply another strategic waypoint. But for the men, it became something else entirely. A reminder of how easily the world they knew could crumble under the weighted hand of war. A temporary command post was established in what remained of a schoolhouse. The chalkboard still carried faint arithmetic from a lesson abandoned mid-sentence, the ghost of children's handwriting etched beneath the thin veil of dust. The regiment's medical officer placed his supplies onto a desk whose legs were partially charred. Above it hung a map of Europe with frayed edges, fluttering slightly whenever the cold wind pushed through the shattered windows. The sight affected even the sturdiest soldiers, for it forced them to confront a reminder of normal life, one that had been violently stripped from the people who lived here. Records later described this building as structurally compromised but serviceable, though those words failed to convey the emotional dissonance that settled in the men's minds as they slept on classroom floors that once echoed with children's laughter. Their first major task was reconnaissance. 2 platoons were sent ahead to examine reports of enemy scouts occupying the forest lines several kilometers northeast. The patrol moved quietly along a road bordered by ruined farmhouses, but soon discovered that the true danger lay not in snipers or ambushes, but in the unseen remnants of the conflict-abandoned trip, hidden pits, unexploded shells, buried beneath soft soil. Each step became an exercise in restraint and discipline. One miscalculation could end a life. One careless movement could detonate a memory of violence left behind by retreating forces. The patrol advanced in staggered formations, their boots sinking into mud still marked by tank tracks, their hands steady but tense, shoulders stiffened whenever a bird took flight or a twig snapped underfoot. For the men could no longer distinguish between the ordinary sounds of nature and the hostile echoes of war. When they reached the forest ridge, the soldiers discovered not enemy scouts, but something altogether more haunting. A group of displaced villagers hiding in shallow dugouts, covered with branches and cloth. These were families who had fled days earlier when the previous wave of soldiers stormed through, leaving destruction in their wake. Many of the civilians were elderly or sick. Others were children whose faces carried the hollow look of prolonged hunger. The regiment distributed what rations they could, though their own supplies were limited. Captain Reinhardt recorded the encounter in his official log, noting the number of civilians, their condition, and the direction to which they planned to flee. Yet what the log did not reflect was the effect this meeting had on the younger soldiers, the realization that war did not simply involve armies facing one another across battlefields, but civilians caught helplessly between movements of power beyond their control. These were the faces they would now carry with them into future engagements, reminders of the cost of every advance and every retreat. The regiment remained in Hohenfeld for several days, constructing makeshift barricades and preparing defensive strategies in case the enemy attempted to reclaim the area. The sound of hammering filled the streets as soldiers reinforced doorways, boarded windows, and set up observation posts in the lofts of ruined buildings. Engineers mapped out lines of sight and calculated firing zones, marking routes for evacuation should the town fall under attack again. Supplies arrived slowly, wagons carrying ammunition, blankets, medical kits, and the occasional crate of letters from home. For many soldiers, reading these letters became a temporary return to the world outside the war. Some smiled faintly as they traced the handwriting of loved ones. Others folded their letters carefully, storing them like fragile keepsakes. Even as the war reshaped their surroundings, these messages preserved fragments of their identities, anchoring them in memories of families, work, and peaceful routines. but the war gave nothing without taking something in return. Just as the regiment began to settle into its defensive preparations, a cold front swept through the valley, coating everything in a thin film of frost. The soldiers adapted as best they could, building fires where smoke would not reveal their positions and conserving fuel by sharing blankets. Despite the conditions, the men continued their duties along the perimeter, hands numb against rifle barrels, breath visible in the icy air. The winter of that year would later be recorded as unusually harsh, and though no large-scale attacks struck Hohenfeld during this period, the cold itself became an enemy. Several soldiers fell ill, others suffered frostbite, and the medical officers' reports filled with descriptions of respiratory infections and fatigue from prolonged exposure. By the end of the regiment's stay, Hohenfeld stood as both a refuge and a graveyard of memories, ruins offering temporary shelter while silently testifying to destruction. When reinforcements finally arrived and orders were issued for the 12th Infantry Division to resume its march toward the front, the men departed with a sense of grim determination. The war had already begun weaving itself into their identities, carving lines of worry into their faces, replacing youthful bravado with a sober understanding of what lay ahead. As they marched out through the same road on which they had arrived, the town faded behind them, but the memory of its silent streets and hollow buildings remained deeply imprinted in their minds. For every soldier who stepped forward, the conflict no longer existed in distant political terms. It was now something tangible, immediate, and undeniably real, force shaping their journey with each passing hour. By the time winter laid its full claim upon the front, the battalion had already endured more than most men could fathom in a lifetime. What had begun as a confident march through the open fields of late summer had transformed into a grinding struggle against mud, hunger, cold, and the diminishing reserves of morale. Reports from the rear described the season as standard for the region, but the soldiers knew that such language had been penned by hands that had never gone numb from frost while tightening a rifle strap, and by men who had never woken to find their breath crystallizing in the air. This winter was not simply weather. It was an adversary patient, merciless, and strategically brilliant in its ability to wear down the human spirit. The battalion's new encampment, if it could be called that, lay in a shallow depression between two ridges, chosen not for tactical advantage but for the simple reason that it was the only place left where the earth could still be dug. Frozen soil had turned other nearby fields into solid stone. Here, at least, the men could drive shovels into the ground, though each strike felt like hammering against iron. They had learned quickly that the enemy was not only across the valley but in the air itself, seeping through torn uniforms, stiffening fingers, and forcing even the strongest men to move slowly, as if pushing through invisible ice. The battalion's commander, Captain Alden Whitford, had aged more in the first month of winter than he had in the preceding decade. His sharp features, once animated with restless energy, now carried a permanent tension. There were nights when he paced outside the line of dugouts while the men slept, wrapped in threadbare blankets or in nothing at all if illness had stripped him of strength. He walked slowly, every step deliberate, as if the ground might give way beneath him. And indeed, sometimes it did. Pockets of thawed mud lurked under the frost crust, swallowing boots, twisting ankles, soaking socks that would not dry for days. Whitford never complained. He observed, he listened, and he carried the quiet weight of understanding that leadership offered no shelter. Food shortages began in earnest in early December. Supply convoys, which had once arrived every few days, now came only twice a month, and even those were inconsistent. When a shipment did manage to reach them, it often contained less than half of what had been promised. The men accepted this with a grim humor that bordered on fatalistic. They joked about the feast of the month whenever a crate of stale biscuits arrived. But Whitford read the hollow eyes of his soldiers, saw the tremor in their hands, and understood the truth. Each day without proper nourishment was another day they lost a piece of themselves. Yet despite all of this cold that burned, hunger that weakened, and exhaustion that blurred the edges of reality, the battalion held its position. There was no glory in it, no brilliant tactical maneuver or strategic brilliance that historians would one day admire. It was simply an act of collective stubbornness, a refusal to dissolve into the landscape the way so many others already had. One of the men, Private Ernest Caldwell exemplified that strange mixture of fragility and resilience that winter forged. He had been a farmer before the war, accustomed to long days, heavy labor, and the rhythm of the earth. When the battalion dug trenches in the frozen ground, Caldwell moved with a familiarity that surprised even the officers. His shovel seemed an extension of his hand, cutting through soil that stopped others cold. Yet Caldwell suffered greatly at night. The cold clung to him in a way it did not cling to the others. He shook uncontrollably, sometimes unable to control his breath, as if winter had singled him out for special torment. Still, each morning he stood and worked again. His endurance, though fragile, held. The worst challenge that winter brought, however, was not cold nor hunger. It was silence. Battles had been frequent in the autumn, punctuated by artillery, gunfire, and shouted orders. Now, the front was eerily still. The enemy remained in their own trenches across the snow-laden valley, visible only as faint shapes moving in the fog or as silhouettes against dying fires at night. Occasionally, a distant thud echoed from the hills, reminding both sides the war had not departed entirely. But for the most part, silence stretched between them like a frozen river. Silence, Whitford realized, was dangerous. In the absence of action, men turned inward. Memories surfaced, memories of families left behind, of promises made, of regrets accumulated. Some men wrote letters compulsively, filling pages with thoughts they had never spoken aloud. Others retreated into themselves, staring out over the snowy valley for hours. A few began talking to companions long dead, their voices soft and wistful. The psychological toll of inactivity gnawed at the battalion in ways enemy fire never had. Winter had become a battlefield of the mind. In early January, an outbreak of illness swept through the camp. Fevers rose quickly, and soon coughing echoed through the trenches like a drumbeat. Medical supplies were meager, and the battalion's sole medic, Sergeant Julian Rowe, found himself working around the clock despite his own weakening health. Rowe improvised treatments from scraps of cloth, boiled snow, and remnants of herbs some of the men carried as charms. He refused to rest, insisting that as long as he could stand, it would work. Whitford tried to order him to sleep, but Rowe shook his head, saying simply that illness waited for no man. The fever outbreak forced the battalion into a painful triage system. Men who were too weak to fight were moved to the rear of the trenches, sheltered in makeshift bunkers. Others who could still lift their weapons remained on watch. Whitford agonized over every decision. To send sick men to a rear position risked exposure during transport through the frozen valley. To keep them at the front was equally cruel. Ultimately, he made his choices based not on tactical logic, but on compassion. Those with even a sliver of strength remained near the warmth of the communal fires. Those who could not move were sheltered as best as possible, with blankets shared unevenly but willingly. During this period of suffering, something unexpected happened among the ranks. A deep, unspoken bond formed. The men stopped thinking of themselves as individuals and began acting as a collective. They shared the last crumbs of bread without hesitation. They carried each other when legs failed. They whispered stories at night to keep one another awake during fevered delirium. Even Whitford, who had once maintained a respectful distance from the lower ranks, found himself speaking quietly with the men during the darkest hours. He discovered their fears, their strengths, their dreams for a future that seemed impossibly distant. These conversations, though brief and often interrupted by coughing or the crackling of freezing wood, forged a connection that helped the battalion survive the bleakest days. In the midst of winter's cruelty, letters from the homeland became priceless treasures. When a postal convoy arrived, frostbitten and weeks late, it was greeted with almost ceremonial reverence. Some men received news of births, others of sickness, and a few of death. Whitford dreaded the latter most. Nothing weighed on him more heavily than reading a letter to one of his soldiers when the handwriting of a spouse or parent trembled with grief. Nevertheless, he read each one aloud, ensuring that its contents were delivered with dignity. Even the harshest news was softened by the quiet compassion in his voice. The men listened with bowed heads, aware the war had tied their fates to grief long before any one letter arrived. As January gave way to February, the temperature dropped further. The valley was now a wasteland of ice-smooth, deceptive, deadly. Snowstorms struck with terrifying suddenness, blurring the line between sky and earth. One moment the world would appear calm, the next it would vanish behind a curtain of white. During one such storm, visibility fell so rapidly that a squad returning from a reconnaissance mission became lost only 50 yards from camp. The men shouted for each other, but the wind swallowed their voices. Whitford ordered lanterns lit at the edges of the trenches, hoping the glow would guide them home. Hours passed before the storm broke, and the squad stumbled back, half frozen, more spirits than men. Their survival was little short of miraculous. Among the papers Whitford kept in his dugout maps, rosters, supply logs, there was one folder he opened, rarely. Casualty lists from the autumn. He kept the folder sealed under a stone, its weight symbolic as well as literal. But during one particularly cold night, unable to sleep, he opened it again and read through the names. Each name represented a face he remembered, a voice he had heard, a life whose path had intersected with his. He read them aloud in a whisper, as though performing a solemn ritual. When he finished, he closed the folder slowly and replaced the stone. Outside, wind howled across the frozen earth like a lament. In late February, something shifted. The silence that had weighed on the battalion for months was broken not by artillery, nor by enemy movement, but by birdsong. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. A lone bird had returned to the valley, its small voice carrying across the thawing snow. Men paused in their tasks and listened, wonder softening their faces. Even the sick stirred when they heard it. The sound reminded them that winter, though powerful, was not eternal. As days passed, the sun lingered a little longer on the horizon. Frost receded, revealing patches of damp earth. The thaw brought mud, but even mud felt like a blessing after months of ice. With each day that hints of spring crept into the valley, the battalion regained a measure of strength. The fevers lessened. Rations improved slightly. The men stood taller, breathed deeper, and allowed themselves to imagine that they might endure after all. Whitford took careful note of these changes, but he did not allow optimism to dull his vigilance. He knew the enemy across the valley had survived the winter as well. He knew renewed fighting would come, but he also understood that his men had been reshaped by the winter, tempered by cold, bonded by suffering, strengthened by the simple act of enduring. The winter had not defeated them. If anything, it had forged them into. The fields where the battle had raged were no longer fields in the traditional sense. They had been transformed into a scarred landscape of craters, shattered earth, and twisted metal. The smell of gunpowder and smoke lingered, clinging to the remnants of trees and buildings, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Soldiers who survived walked through this devastation in a daze, their boots sinking into mud mixed with fragments of artillery shells, discarded equipment, and the personal belongings of those who had fallen. Each step was a reminder of the chaos, the sheer scale of destruction that had unfolded in hours but would leave scars for decades. Civilians who had not fled in time returned cautiously, their eyes wide with disbelief. They wandered among what had once been homes, shops, and schools, now reduced to ruins. The air was heavy with grief, yet also with a strange, fragile sense of survival, a recognition that life, even amid devastation, found a way to persist. Medical teams moved across the battlefield, tending to those who were wounded but still clinging to life. Makeshift tents served as operating rooms, with minimal lighting and the constant echo of distant artillery. Doctors worked tirelessly, their hands covered in blood, faces etched with exhaustion, eyes hollow from the relentless pressure. They treated gunshot wounds, burns, shrapnel injuries, and infections that spread quickly in the chaos. Every decision was a balance between what could be done immediately and what had to wait, with the awareness that every delay could cost a life. Nurses and volunteers moved alongside, offering comfort, holding trembling hands, and whispering words of encouragement. In these moments, the human capacity for compassion shone bright, even as the shadows of war threatened to engulf everything. Amid the ruins, commanders and soldiers struggled to process what had occurred. Reports were written and rewritten, maps were adjusted, and the strategic significance of each maneuver debated. The veterans of the fight, those who had survived, carried the psychological toll silently. Many spoke little, their expressions vacant, haunted by memories of comrades falling beside them, by the screams and chaos that had erupted in mere moments. Letters to families back home were written with trembling hands, often incomplete, sometimes the first indication loved ones received that a son, brother, or husband had survived at all. Behind every report and statistic was a human story of fear, courage, and loss. The local population, having witnessed the destruction firsthand, struggled with the dual reality of grief and resilience. They organized relief efforts, clearing rubble, distributing food, and aiding the wounded. Churches and community centers became shelters and coordination points, filled with volunteers who had lost family members yet found the strength to help strangers. Children, previously shielded from the horrors, now faced the stark reality of mortality, their innocence challenged by the sight of broken bodies and destroyed homes. Stories passed from one neighbor to another, forming a collective memory that would shape the community for generations. Every brick carried a tale. Every scar on the landscape was a testament to the lives forever altered by a conflict that seemed both distant and immediate. Months passed, and the rhythm of reconstruction began. Soldiers were sent home, leaving behind the remnants of a battlefield that would never fully recover. Families attempted to reclaim what remained of their former lives, rebuilding homes, tending to fields, and attempting to restore routines. Yet the trauma lingered. Veterans grappled with memories that would not fade. Civilians mourned the loss of those who would never return. And the land itself bore the visible scars of violence. Monuments were erected in towns and villages, honoring the fallen and serving as reminders of the price paid. Education resumed in damaged classrooms. Children learned of maps and history alongside lessons in resilience, while parents endeavored to shield them from repeating the horrors they had endured. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the economic and social repercussions became apparent. Crops had been destroyed, trade routes interrupted, and industries left in ruins. Communities that once thrived found themselves struggling to meet basic needs. Markets reopened slowly, often with shortages of essential goods, and families relied on whatever they could salvage or grow. This period of scarcity brought both hardship and unexpected solidarity, as neighbors shared food, shelter, and resources, forming bonds born out of necessity but strengthened by shared adversity. Amid this slow process of healing, correspondence and accounts of the battle reached distant regions, drawing attention from historians, journalists, and policymakers. The events of that day became a case study in strategy, human endurance, and the unpredictable consequences of war. The surviving soldiers, once anonymous participants, began sharing their stories in letters, memoirs, and interviews, contributing to a narrative that extended beyond tactical reports. The town, once merely a dot on the map, became a symbol of survival and reconstruction, embodying the tension between remembrance and the need to move forward. Each story, each life, recounted, added a layer to the complex tapestry of human experience during conflict, underscoring the fragility and resilience inherent in societies touched by war. As the year drew to a close, the community reflected on the paradox of survival, the extraordinary endurance required to live through war, and the ordinary courage needed to resume daily life afterward. Fields were replanted, streets repaired, and markets reopened, but beneath the veneer of normalcy remained a shared understanding that the world had irrevocably changed. People who had witnessed devastation now carried a quiet vigilance, a respect for life tempered by the knowledge of how easily it could be lost. They celebrated small victories, cherished moments of peace, and acknowledged that the memory of the conflict would continue to shape their collective identity, influencing the decisions, values, and aspirations of future generations. Even as reconstruction progressed, communities struggled with the emotional aftermath. Families searched for missing loved ones, mourned the irretrievable, and struggled with the internal conflicts between guilt, anger, and relief. Women who had maintained homes in the absence of men found themselves both exhausted and empowered, taking roles in work, agriculture, and local governance that were previously unavailable to them. Children carried a complex understanding of the world, simultaneously fearful, curious, and eager to grasp the meaning of survival. These subtle shifts in social structure, psychology, and behavior became woven into the narrative of recovery, illustrating the long-lasting influence of a single battle on the dynamics of everyday life. The aftermath of the battle left the town forever changed, not only in its landscape but in the very fabric of its society. Streets that had once been vibrant with daily activity now bore the marks of destruction: crumbling walls, shattered windows, and scorched earth. Yet amid the ruins, life slowly began to return. Shops reopened with limited stock, children cautiously returned to damaged schools, and families attempted to reconstruct homes that had been reduced to skeletons of brick and timber. The process was painstaking and uneven, yet it was a testament to human resilience and determination. Communities, once fractured by fear and loss, now found a renewed sense of purpose in working together to restore normalcy. Every brick laid and every field replanted carried with it the silent promise that life, despite all, would continue. Veterans of the battle, both young and old, faced an entirely different reconstruction. That of the mind, the trauma of what they had witnessed friends falling beside them, the screams of the wounded, and the unrelenting chaos of combatantmen vivid. They struggled in silence, navigating a world that had returned to peace, even as they were haunted by memories of destruction. Support networks, often informal at first, began to emerge, providing camaraderie and understanding that could not be found elsewhere. Letters, diaries, and later interviews became crucial tools for processing experiences, and slowly, soldiers began sharing their stories with younger generations, ensuring that the lessons of courage and the cost of conflict were not forgotten. Civilians, too, carried the invisible wounds of war. Women who had assumed responsibility for households and work during the absence of men found themselves balancing relief and exhaustion. The elderly, who had witnessed the collapse of entire neighborhoods, shared wisdom and cautionary tales with their children. Even as families rebuilt their homes and livelihoods, there was a pervasive awareness that life was fragile, and that the sense of security once taken for granted could vanish in a single day. Community gatherings, religious services, and public commemorations became both catharsis and education, reminding residents of the fragility of peace and the importance of vigilance, empathy, and cooperation. Education resumed, though it bore the imprint of recent events. Teachers adjusted curricula to include the history of the battle and its consequences, not as abstract concepts, but as lived reality. Children learned of maps, strategies, and the geography of conflict, alongside lessons in moral responsibility and civic duty. Teachers carefully navigated the trauma still present in their students, ensuring that the next generation would carry an understanding of resilience and ethical responsibility forward. Field trips to the areas most affected by the battle, guided by veterans and historians, allowed children to witness the landscape's transformation and hear first-hand accounts of endurance and survival. Economically, the town faced challenges that would take decades to overcome. Farms, factories, and trade networks had been disrupted, and resources were scarce. Families relied on ingenuity, bartering, and shared labor to maintain basic subsistence. Local leadership emerged, organizing cooperative initiatives to rebuild infrastructure, secure food, and provide medical assistance. Markets gradually stabilized, and small businesses reopened, though the scars of war were ever present in both the economy and the collective psyche. The narrative of survival became intertwined with the practical realities of reconstruction, forming a foundation upon which future prosperity could be cautiously built. Monuments and memorials were erected, not only to honor the fallen but to serve as enduring reminders of the cost of conflict and the value of peace. Civic leaders, historians, and educators collaborated to ensure that the memory of the battle was preserved accurately and respectfully, embedding it into the town's identity. Families visited these memorials regularly, leaving flowers, lighting candles, and telling stories to children who had been too young to witness the events firsthand. These acts of remembrance reinforced the collective understanding that survival and progress required both acknowledgement of the past and commitment to the future. By the end of the decade, The town had transformed from a place of devastation into a community marked by resilience. Life had returned to a rhythm that, while informed by past trauma, carried a quiet optimism. Streets bustled once more with commerce. Children's laughter echoed in repaired classrooms, and families celebrated milestones with the profound appreciation for the fragility and strength of life. Veterans and civilians alike carried forward lessons in endurance, empathy, and the importance of solidarity in times of crisis. The battle had left indelible marks, but it had also forged a renewed sense of community, a recognition of human resilience, and an understanding that the experiences of war could inform, rather than define, the future. The legacy of the battle extended beyond the town itself. Letters, memoirs, and official accounts circulated throughout the region, informing military strategy, emergency response planning, and civic preparedness for future generations. The stories of individual heroism, the compassionate acts of civilians, and the slow process of recovery were recorded meticulously, ensuring that the human experiences behind statistics were not forgotten. Each narrative emphasized not only the horrors of war, but the capacity of humans to endure, adapt, and rebuild. From the ruins of craters, shattered homes, and scorched fields, a society emerged that had witnessed profound loss yet refused to succumb to despair. The survivors, both young and old, bore the memories of devastation as guides for the future, fostering a culture of empathy, preparedness, and vigilance. The battle had ended, but its lessons persisted etched into the land, the hearts of its citizens, and the chronicles of history, ensuring that the sacrifices and courage of those who lived through it would not fade with time.